This program is made possible by funding from the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.
Hello everyone, I'm Diane Trees, Director of the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies and host of Metro Center Outlook. We hear a lot about redefining and rethinking the way we do business in America. But what does that mean? From policymakers to the unemployed, it seems everyone is struggling to understand what our economic future should be. Coming up next, a special edition of Metro Center Presents, a discussion on emerging industries and how they can accelerate Central Florida's future.
Our first speaker today is Dr. Graham Toft. Dr. Toft is without accent, I think he's been in America so long, but originally a native of Australia. And he has a PhD from Purdue University, and he is the president and founder of Growth Economics. Growth Economics partners with both the public and the private sector and focuses on entrepreneurial growth, innovation, development, and economic competitiveness. If you would please give a warm welcome to Dr. Graham Toft.
Thanks, Randy, and good morning. It's I've been told that we're looking forward. I like the statement that was just made about be the parent of your future, not the child of the past. And so we're focusing today very much on the future, and I feel like I've almost got myself well acquainted with working with this team that you're going to meet on the panel on several telephone conversations. So I don't know whether I'm to get you excited or you to get me excited about this region, frankly, or this county. But my task is to give you a kind of a bird's eye view from more of a national, state, and regional perspective of what's happening to communities across the United States, and then seed some thoughts about what that means for positioning yourself for economic growth in what's going to be a very different economy. What some pundits call the new normal, I call it the next abnormal. So let's see how we go with this. I'm going to pose a few big questions I heard on our telephone conversations, and then talk a little bit about what I hope to get you excited about, because I was told every speaker and every panelist is to get you excited about something. And then what's been happening is to the U.S., what our outlook looks like for the county, what's working, what's not working in economic development, and a few closing remarks. Firstly, here are the big questions that I heard talked about by people on our telephone conversations. I'm not going to answer them all for you, but I hope that some of them will kind of get covered in various aspects of today's discussion. The most important thing of the two bottom questions there is, okay, how can we come up with our own grow your own plan in a county or a region? And what kind of appropriate roles are there for us as business leaders, civic leaders, government leaders, education leaders, etc.? What I hope to get you excited about is that the U.S. will grow its way out of these economic doldrums. We always have, and we will again. The regenerative economics is very much part of our DNA, and that means that every time we have this kind of severity of a recession, we find a way to come out of it. And we normally discover some kind of new normal, some kind of new way of thinking of the world out of each of the recessions that have happened since World War II. And this one is particularly acute and different, which I'll get to in a bit. But this kind of thing happens from the bottom up. It doesn't happen from the top down. It's historical. It's how the United States grew. And I'll come back to that a little later. And this kind of growth that we talk about from the bottom up is far from uniform in the United States. It never has been uniform. It happens in little, if you like, islands of prosperity, and the rest follows. So I want to talk about that. And finally, this growth is DIY, do it yourself. They're the kind of things I hope to get you excited about. Here are the areas that I would hope you would take an interest in this excitement. The top two ones are the ones we're going to focus on mainly today. That is innovation and creativity. And while we're going to focus on technology a fair bit, I'm hoping that you don't limit your thinking to that. It's creativity in how we do government, how we address poverty issues, creativity in the arts and performing arts and so forth. All of this is part of a creative environment that feeds on itself. And of course, entrepreneurship we're going to talk a lot about today. There are 6 other areas to think about as we think about how we do it yourself at a local level. Is talent, and of course we're in the headquarters of a school corporation, and we need to think about the human capital, and that will come up today. New markets and the tradable sector. That is, some businesses here clearly serve the local market, and others serve or partially serve an expanded market beyond this county. It's that tradable sector that brings in dollars to the county and to the region. That's a very important factor as we find our way out of these doldrums. A pro-business climate, great place to live, partnerships and collaborations. If we could be more sense of our unity, how much would that empower us? And finally, the thing that I'd hope that you think about, that is not as much on your mind, if you like, on your radar screen as it is on mine, because it's my line of business, is how do you track and this constantly moving change? And how can you be better at that, since this is going to be extremely fast-moving economy as we move into this next recovery phase? So if you're not excited, I'm sorry. I'll try and get you even more excited as we go along. Just a little bit of history. Where do we come from? I know that we do not want to be the child here of the past, but just a little bit to reflect on where we are because of how we're going to move out of this. Is in 2008, as Muhammad El-Arian at PIMCO, the largest bond house in the world, said the unthinkable became the thinkable. We just didn't expect this. Nobody except a few at the margins of the marketplace were betting on some kind of a major catastrophe. But basically, the unthinkable became the thinkable, especially brought on by a financial crisis coupled with a housing and real estate crisis. In 2009, the thinkable became the shrinkable. And the only thing that was expanding in 2009 was government, basically. In 2010, 2011, the shrinkable is becoming kind of the recoverable, renewable. We're kind of at that phase where we get a sense there's been a change the last, especially 6 to 9 months. Talking to Bill McDermott just before the meeting, yes, he's seeing some uptick in interest in the region and the county and so forth, yes. But then the 2012-2013 period, the renewable gains legs. Much slower, most people think much slower than most recoveries. And in fact, Moody's Economy.com forecast back in 2009, the jobless rate in the United States may not return to its natural 5% before 2013. And that's going to vary a lot across the United States. So what happened was Washington responded and understandably focused first on stabilization, normalization, recovery, demand stimulus, etc. Now, having done that, we're worried about the aftermaths, deficits and growth. That's where we are in the national debate. At the state and local response, I couldn't believe it. In 2008, 2009, I couldn't get any interest among my clients, my group of, if you might, like my network, about thinking about the future, about planning or whatever. All they were worried about is how do we get those stimulus dollars, right? That's everything for you local officials. The money was out there. How do we make sure we get our fair share? That is now relatively, in perspective, over. And now we must ask the question, what do we do for ourselves? The history lesson from my research is very clear. After every recession, only 5 or 6 states take the lead. And 20 to 30 regions in the United States take the lead. It's not a lot, and the rest follow. Basically, time and time again, okay? So the question is, are you part of that team? Or is somebody else taking the lead and then you to follow? Growth will be disparate. It always has been in the United States. It will be even more so in the next 3 to 4 years. And basically, our motto is, you're on your own for growth. Our elected officials are obviously trying to balance budgets, maintain a certain sense of stability. You see the data from the school district there about their finances and so forth. They are worried about sustaining where we are. The real issue is the only way we're going to get out of this situation is to grow ourselves out of it. We can no longer rely on manna from heaven, from Uncle Sam or whatever. We can't rely on austerity only. We're going to rely on growth. That's why we're here, to look at what the outlook is. The outlook for Florida is mixed, very mixed, according to my data and according to most of the work that I see. It's not a leading growth state as it was back 5 to 10 years ago, or not talked about as that. And some are ranking the state quite low in its current growth situation. Portfolio.com, a business-oriented website, ranks Florida 48th. I wouldn't put it that low, but that's the kind of area in which some are thinking. The Pew study on fiscal distress 2 years ago put Florida in the top 10 states, along with California. The third bullet there, I wouldn't put it there. In fact, I think fiscal constraint on growth is not nearly as severe. I'm ranking it about 9th. But the point is, there's a lot of discontinuity in what the data is telling us about where the state is as a whole. My specialty is to look at the entrepreneurial economy of states and regions, and you can see in the 3 indexes I use, there's a lot of variation. In terms of entrepreneurial change, which is what happened in the last 2 to 3 years, still looking good. Entrepreneurial vitality, the total level of entrepreneurial activity, still in the top 50% of the state. But the entrepreneurial climate, the prospect of the future growth based on the financing situation, based on technology, competitiveness, and broad industry prospects, not as good. So you can see we've got a lot of discontinuity here in what the data is telling us about this state. Not like it was that we were so happy about 10 years ago. But there was one thing to be happy about. We were ranked in the top 5 states as happiest states. Science Magazine, January 2010. Central Florida, there was an article Bill McDermott sent me just last week. It was a very interesting article comparing Miami and Central Florida and how Central Florida is outpacing Miami area, which has always been seen as kind of the major engine, especially on the international side of growth in the state. And the thing that is making Central Florida unique in this situation, as we talk about these dynamics, is the fact that it has a very diverse economy. One thing you have learned probably in your personal investments, in your business, in your community is diversification really matters in a fast-changing economy. You need to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that thoughtfully invested in various ways. And it's the same in your economy. So we have a diverse economy here, a tech advantaged manufacturing, biotech, medical, and of course grounded originally in entertainment and tourism. Still agriculture. Don't forget agriculture. It's still an important part of the U.S. economy. Advanced business services. Some of you are in that business. Insurance, accounting, legal, specialty, IT, and so forth. Very strong in this area. And of course, this area is strong in global trade, not just to Latin America, but more broadly because of the attraction that the visibility it brings to people from outside the United States with the entertainment and tourism sector. Direct flights really matter. The research I've been, especially in the high-tech industry, you have a lot of direct flights. Why? Because people fly here directly to see Mickey, right? Okay? But you can't believe what an asset this is, and it needs more investigation as to how you can leverage off that, by the way. Of course, you have a high-tech corridor. You're looking at how you use your corridors as anchors for development, and abundant, competitively priced housing, talent, attracting talent, which we'll get to in a little bit, and of course, high labor mobility, especially through highways, and of course, that is going to be one of the problem areas is the congestion level is starting to build up like it did in parts of Silicon Valley, and so you're looking at commuter rail solutions, which is going to make a lot of sense for an area like this. But the outlook for this region within the state looks particularly promising overall, okay? Now for Seminole County, here's a few data points. I'm using data sets that you use at your economic development group, so I'm not, I didn't put the source, but Bill McDermott has the inventory of these data, which you can all check out. But I'm just teasing you a little bit to give you a sense of what's going on. There is still growth going on here. As you can see, the population is projected to grow in the 5 years from 2007 to 2012. In fact, from 210 to 220, another source I saw, still expecting about 20% growth. So you're still getting population growth, you're still getting growth in housing units, you're still getting growth in per capita income, all in the kind of mid to upper single-digit categories. Now look at talent. Associate degree, bachelor's degree, graduate degree, look at that growth. So your talent base is growing even faster than your physical resource base, which is very, very encouraging. And I put in red particularly the associate degree, okay? Because the associate degree tells me you are preparing more and more people for what we call the mid-level, mid-skill categories of occupations. And these are the occupations that are growing. These are the occupations that will give you much higher productivity. I see a few people nodding. They're probably educators, okay? But this is something that people have not fully appreciated. It's both your high-level research universities and their work in the vocational, technical career areas and the work of the community colleges and the intersection between the high schools and the workplace, which I heard you talking about internships, right on, to get young people learning, integrated into the business world early on, and learning skills, maybe not necessarily for that final associate or bachelor's degree to begin with, but in the long run, probably working in that direction. Remember, we are talking about lifelong learning now, and it's clear to me from the data you're getting it here in this county. Now let's look at businesses, because this is another data source I use. It's called the National Establishment Time Series, which is basically Dun & Bradstreet data. I'm just taking change in the first year that we only have to 2008, so it's really the first year of the recession. Okay, I'm just giving you 1 year. I know it's not a detailed analysis, but just to tease you to think about what's happening in terms of the number and size of businesses. First, you see the number of establishments, An establishment, you can have several establishments as part of one business, as you understand, branches and so forth. 93% of those are what we call resident businesses, that is locally owned. They're domiciled here. And so you have a very strong local base of, if you like, business ownership. Self-employment. Of those businesses, self-employment is 33%. It has increased 17% in that 1 year. And employment of businesses employing 1 to 2, the number of businesses has increased. I'll get to employment in a minute. The number of businesses, the number of self-employment businesses, because people were affected by the downturn, they moved out of the larger businesses, the larger corporations, and they've gone out on their own. It's happened across the United States. It's a huge phenomenon, which I'm going to talk about a bit. It has an upside and a downside. Small businesses, those who employ 2 to 9, I'm sure some of you represent those businesses, grew 20% in number. And then the larger businesses did not grow in number. So you can see the number of small businesses, either single individual businesses or 2 to 9 employment, was phenomenal even in that first year of the downturn. That's telling you something. Second, where's the employment in those businesses? You can see the total employment there, 272,000. It grew in this time period, very promising. Resident businesses grew even faster than the average. The self-employment grew phenomenally because more people became self-employed, but then also the employment of the 2 to 9 group. So those are the locus of where jobs are being created right now. That's not to say over the business cycle it will not differ. That's why you need to track what happens in this economy much more delicately, because we'll see employment in the 10 to 99 start to pick up, and obviously in the larger companies, especially hopefully as you attract more investment into the area, as frankly states like Illinois blow it in terms of their public policy, and businesses are getting so upset there that even the governor of Indiana is going over to Illinois to recruit and get businesses to relocate. Why can't they come to Florida? Okay, so first and second stage business, you can see the data is very clear on this at this point in the business cycle, how critical they are. The outlook for the businesses that are opening and closing versus expanding and contracting is very important too. You can see the businesses that opened minus those that closed in that 1 year was a growth of jobs of 89,000. So significant contribution of those very small businesses opening versus closing. And the expansion to contraction is also very important. You can see more expanding than contracting to this existing business. So when you think about strategy, it's not just about business attraction, it's about how we find and empower and enable existing businesses, because they are major contributors to this net gain in jobs as well as those who come in. In fact, those who came in versus those that moved out, a very small gain in this time period. Very expected because it was, of course, a year of a recession. The point that I make, and I get into this big debate, especially among my field of professionals, is people take a one-sided view of growth. They say, oh, you've got to be out there business attraction, or oh, you've got to be out there worrying about small business. In fact, the two go hand in hand, and they blend very well, and they must blend very well now as we move forward. The next most important point is it's really the growth companies that matter within those categories. Whether there have been businesses that have moved in or whether there are businesses that exist here, it's the growth companies that really count, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Next, about industries. You know your industries. Again, I mentioned they're very diversified, and we're going to be talking a lot about the strengths of the tech area on the panel, so I'm going to leave that to the panel. You can see Enterprise Florida's targeted industries for incentives clean tech, life sciences, infotech, aviation, aerospace, homeland security, financial professional services, many of which have a strong presence in this county. So you can see a nice kind of blend between what the state's trying to accomplish and who you are. So what's working in economic development? As we look forward, the counties across Florida are using various strategies, from business attraction to technology corridors, to exporting, the targeted clusters, pursuing green growth, etc. There's a whole swath of, and you have several of these strategies combined in what you're doing. Overall, in this field of activity, this field of economic development, we do pretty good, and you do really good, at business attraction and retention, small business development with your SBDC and other things, and workforce development. What needs attention as we look at this kind of economy is growth company development, helping companies or providing the right climate in which companies are fast growth, those that are either fast or intending to grow, to provide them the right support environment to do that. And some of you know about the Edward Lowe Foundation's work in the state, I think, and they have a program. In fact, I think you have it going on here, right? Right? What's it called? Florida Grow FL. And that'll probably come up in the discussion as well. Okay? So the key message in this fast-changing economy is, in economic development, we have focused on those three things above pretty well. The next frontier is worrying about our growth companies, and particularly worrying about how those growth companies stay where they are rather than move around, because they are themselves very dynamic in the way they view the world. So if we accelerate next growth, which is what we're talking about, here are some kind of core strategies I would suggest we think about today, and as we work toward the next 6 or so months positioning ourselves. Firstly, think of this region as a business growth zone and package it as a business growth zone. There's a lot of work being done clearly in this region, a lot of collaboration at the regional level, including the high-tech corridor and so forth, a lot of oneness, and that's going to have to be nurtured, and you're an important county in that game. The second is thinking about how we improve this place as an entrepreneurial hotspot, especially existing businesses that are growing, and linking growth company strategies with business recruitment strategies together. The third thing is to think about how we do trade. Clearly there's a number of businesses that do trade. Clearly there's a lot of focus on trade, both nationally. The President's been talking about it a lot lately. There's been a lot of discussion about more trade agreements and so forth. And of course, Florida depends on trade. And Enterprise Florida has made a big effort in this. Joe Kalinovich there does a lot of good work there. And any way that we can foster the growth of the tradable sector, that is business, doing business with this county, is really important, and an openness to doing that. And the final core strategy is diversify the talent base. And while the educators are here, I don't want to upset them by saying there's talent out there already in the United States. There are 20 million people that are unemployed or underemployed in the United States right now. And they're thinking about moving, or some of them are. They're not moving as much as they used to in the 80 and 82's recession because they're stuck with a house that they can't sell. So there's less mobility, but it will come. So how are you going to position this place as a great place for talent pods, for people who want to come and position themselves here in Indiana, in Florida, whether they bring themselves from Indiana or from Maryland, for example, where they've increased the income tax, and especially the high net worth individuals are scratching their head and saying, where are we going to live next? Okay, so there is a tax climate issue that is conducive at the personal level in Florida, and there's also this issue of, hey, you know, if I'm going to move, maybe it's best to move a little warmer. So whatever it is, for those of you in the real estate business, is there a way that you can position this region more effectively as more and more people in the next couple of years in the United States think about hey, where's the best place to live and where's the best place to do business? Some practical tools then, finishing off on this entrepreneurial theme, are as follows. Entrepreneurship, talk it, teach it. For those in your schools, do more of it. When you teach geography, history, teach about entrepreneurship. Have small business competitions starting in the school, certainly in the community college, certainly in UCF, whatever it is. We have got to talk this up because it's the only way and it's the only competitive advantage really left for the United States and some fields of technology. We have it in our DNA. I don't understand how it happens because we don't do a very good job at integrating it very well into our schools or into our formal institutions very well, but it is there, okay? So in any way we can nurture that and celebrate it. And also the great thing about the United States is we are not afraid of failure, and you learn from failure, and you do not knock those who fail nearly as much here as many other countries. Second most important thing, and these are cheap, these don't cost hardly anything, it's just about the way we do things, is business-to-business networking. It's businesses feeding ideas off each other, spending a lot of time thinking through things together. It's the Silicon Valley phenomenon. People say they want to replicate Silicon Valley and whatever. The thing that happens there is what happens over the informal discussions it always has between entrepreneurs or people with ideas and venture capitalists and so forth. That kind of networking, which is what the Edward Lowe Foundation is trying to encourage, is much further in our, it seems to be on our radar screen as we go forward. Economic gardening program, which I've just mentioned, which will probably come up in discussion. Obviously, capital access is important, making sure we have the Centennial Bank here. I was just saying to the folks from Centennial Bank, it's the community bankers and the regional bankers that are really important right now because the big ones are clearly not lending for a variety of reasons. It's those that have not gotten into trouble as much, and it's those that can lend at the near bankable margin area with some area of cushion, and it's also, of course, those angel capital networks and venture capital presence that's really important to nurture now in this region. University linkages, accelerators, and accelerators is a program that I've introduced. But the idea of accelerators is getting students into your companies as they're learning early on, embedding their new things they're learning, discovering how they can contribute, as well as finding ways in which they might have a real opportunity to grow in your particular setting. And of course, schools and colleges are centers of lifelong learning. Skills on the go, and then of course, track it. I can't emphasize enough, this kind of economy and what we do not do well at the county level and below normally in the United States is we don't know what's happening to us fast enough. So more dashboarding, more routine checking of how things are going is going to be really important as we move forward. Finally, wrap up then, if we keep doing what we are doing, we'll keep getting what we've been getting, and that's not going to work in the United States. It's not rocket science. Every major recession leads to a new normal. We are probably in some kind of variation of that, a next abnormal. And the regenerative qualities we're focusing on are entrepreneurship, innovation, talent attraction, and pro-growth policies and practices at the state and local level. Thank you.
MJ, would you give us just a moment and explain your role at the university and how that would relate to our business community here?
Well, first off, I teach school, so I turned in my final grades for my class just day before yesterday. So my paying job is to be Vice President for Research and Commercialization at the university. And how that relates to today's topic is that my office is dedicated to helping build Central Florida's innovation economy and coupling the academic enterprise of the university into the business sector of our region and our state. Now, we do that I think a good metaphor is a three-legged stool. The first leg in the stool is to focus. Every organization says that it should focus on some key things where it has strength and develop its strength in key areas. At UCF, we pay particular attention to that. The second goal of the university is excellence in key areas of research and graduate education. Now, we had one of those duh moments where you say, duh, you're going to focus, what should you focus on? Well, we could focus on a lot of things that didn't matter to Central Florida, but we decided to focus on areas that overlap the economic interests and aspiration of our region and our state. Got to use something to pick, so why don't we pick that? We heard an excellent keynote here about the importance of talent and the importance of clustering. So this covers both those areas in focus. When I came here 25 years ago to start the optics and laser program at UCF, somebody asked me what I thought was a very dumb question, and that was, will we have a better optics program than the University of Florida? I said, who the heck would care? The companies that are going to employ our graduates and the companies that are going to be started by our faculty and our graduates are not competing with companies in Alachua County, for God's sakes. They're competing with companies in Munich, in Taipei, all over the world. So if you're going to focus on something, be arrogant enough to say you're going to be the very best in what it is that you do. So what have we focused on? Optics and lasers, simulation and training. Another example is solar energy. And when we do that focus, the first thing to do is to recruit top talent in faculty, top talent in students. There are two spin-off companies here in Seminole County that come, one from a faculty member, one from a student. And you don't get that happen unless you recruit top talent. Second is to help that talent get the resources they need to do their work. These are people, if you gave them enough resources, would work themselves to death. Those of you in business have not seen competitive people until you get in a laboratory with a competitive faculty member. They are aggressive, they're arrogant, and they work all the time. As I said, if you get them enough resources, they work themselves to death. So my job is to make sure they don't have quite enough resources. Just keep them working, but not all the way to the end. So another way that I like to phrase that is that, you know, the good book tells us that Moses made bricks without straw. We're not Moses, so we need the straw, all right? So we try to secure the resources for our faculty to do good work. Second, we've got the focus, we've got the talent. Now we try to engage that talent with Florida industry. Now, the primary mechanism for doing that, or a primary mechanism, if not the primary mechanism, is the Florida High Technology Corridor. And Randy Berry's going to talk about that, so I'll leave it at that. The third leg in the stool is to help build the ecosystem for the innovation economy. And it really is an ecosystem. And this involves things like the UCF incubation program, the work that we do with the Grow Florida program, we'll get into later, to help that we give to companies in competing for federal SBIRs to help solve the problem of the lack of early stage venture money in our region. The UCF Venture Lab that helps us and determine which technologies can be commercialized and helps companies outside the university assess the value of their technology as well. We heard about the importance of entrepreneurial education, so we started a very vigorous program at UCF, everything from a weekend boot camp in entrepreneurship to degree programs in entrepreneurship, and something which we call the Joust. We do a lot of things centered around knighthood at the UCF, and the Joust is a competition among students. It's a business plan competition funded by local business communities, and the requirements is to take a business person, these are people that dress nice like you folks do, and geeks and nerds like me, so they have to team together and compete, and the winner gets a year minimum space in the incubator and $10,000 of capital to get started. So we try to look at where are pieces missing in the ecosystem and what can the university do to fill in those missing pieces. So how are we doing? Well, this January, the Carnegie Foundation for the Studies of Higher Education moved UCF into the top tier of America's research universities. That's a pretty substantial accomplishment. And people ask me, well, what does that mean? I said, well, it's sort of like the athletic department being moved into the BCS, all right? It's kind of that sort of thing. The Florida High-Tech Corridor Council, Randy's going to bore you to death with statistics. I'll just say that we started with requiring a one-for-one match of funds from Florida companies to what the university, what the corridor was putting into the project. It got oversubscribed. We went to requiring two-for-one match. It got oversubscribed. We went to requiring now three-for-one match. It's oversubscribed. It's so darn successful. So what does the Florida legislature do? It cut the program. But didn't turn it off, but it substantial cut this coming year. But we go on anyway. The incubation program, we have 9, soon to have 10 sites. These are all community partnerships. Every single one of them is a community partnership. There are 95 clients in incubator now. They have generated over 2,000 jobs with average salary, well over twice the number we saw for the average salary in Seminole County, over $60,000 a year. We have 35 of those clients, by the way, in Seminole County, and 2 of our most successful graduates also here in Seminole County. We're all into rankings, football rankings and others. The IEEE Spectrum, which is one of the largest technical magazines in the world, did a ranking of the strength of patent portfolios for universities. And last year's ranking, UCF was ranked number 3, behind the University of California system and the University of Texas system. Now, just like in football, there are different polls. Another poll, IP Today, ranked us number 8. But in 3 of the last 4 years, we've been ranked in the top 10. I guarantee you, if the football team was doing that well, you'd hear about it every single day. So we're doing okay. And a final thing I'd say was we had a big effort this last year that involved a variety of partners, over 80, to attract a major activity with Semitech Corporation here in Central Florida. Well, the good news is the team won. The bad news is we're kind of a little bit sitting on the bench, but we're going to get $5 million in that award, and we're going to get a Semitech presence here in Central Florida, and we can build on that as we go.
Mr. Barrage, even though MJ took about half of your fire and thunder, if you would go ahead and notice what I'll say it again just for the heck of it, because for your brief remarks.
Mr. Toft, on his one of his wonderful slides, had a list of things, categories of things we should aspire to achieve. And what the Florida High-Tech Corridor Council is about is certainly the innovation and creativity, the first item on his slide, entrepreneurship and talent. We're an economic development initiative of 3 great universities. The idea came from UCF President John Hitt, so it's UCF in partnership now with USF President Judy Genshaft and University of Florida, Go Gators. In this room, that seems to be the appropriate thing to do from time to time, but also Go Knights and Go Bulls, please, from my world. So President Manchin. So I have the honor of having 3 university presidents as the co-chair of the Florida High-Tech Corridor Council and my 3 bosses. Our vision is quite simple. We want to become, to use MJ's phrase in terms of an audacious goal, we want to become the #1 high-tech region in the world. Our mission is to attract, retain, and grow high-tech industry and the workforce to support it. We're a funding organization, thanks to Tony Jennings, incoming President of the Senate back in '96, and Dan Webster, incoming Speaker of the House, and the combination of the University of Central Florida, the University of South Florida then, as well as a little company that George Kosmak and a few of us came from called AT&T. We received a modicum of funding in '96, and because we did a good job with that funding and partnering with companies, more funding in '97 and '98. So we're a state-funded organization. Initially, as a volunteer, I heard it was recurring, and I said, well, all those English courses at Butler University, I know we can't play basketball. I understand the word recurring, at least I think I do. What does it mean in Florida? And I said, oh, that's a good word. I like that word. So we're recurringly funded by the state of Florida to do 4 things. And those 4 things fit the 3 things on Mr. Toft's slide. We fund research projects between our 3 universities and companies. We fund marketing projects with economic development organizations and chambers of commerce. We fund workforce projects with workforce boards, and I saw Gary Earl here, as well as state colleges. With the state colleges or community colleges, we have funded 7 associate degrees. Proud to report Ann McGee's Seminole State College an associate degree in digital media, in which the corridor put in about $175,000, with the promise by Ann and her team of bringing industry to the table to define the curriculum, and then the college would get that curriculum approved. We also fund programs to showcase for teachers what it's like to work in high-tech industry. It's one thing to have these associate degrees. It's one thing to partner with our community and state colleges using university and company lobbied for funds. But this partnership that's been referenced here, and we'll reference it again and again today, this partnership includes, as one professor said, I've got the degree now, but I can't get the students to go into the program. So as Chairman Schaffner knows, about 14 years ago we started a program. We now have showcased for almost 4,000 math and science teachers, not only in Seminole County, but across the 23-county high-tech corridor region, what it's like to work in a high-tech company. We are also funders of entrepreneurial initiatives, starting with Dr. Swallow and his mentee, Tom O'Neill, wanting to start an incubator many years ago. That has now morphed into 9 incubators, I believe, under contract, and the corridor has been the initial funder of those, and proud to do it. We also fund the Grow FL program, which you're going to hear a little bit more about, for Stage 2 companies. We fund the now National Entrepreneur Center, Commissioner Thompson, funded by Orange County and Disney and others, a great program for entrepreneurs who want to start or grow a business. So with that, Mr. Morris, I'll pass the baton to the noted General.
Thank you very much. General?
Well, thank you, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to be part of the panel. I did indeed serve the United States Air Force for 34 years, and so I come to the National Center for Simulation very much as a user of simulation and training technology. And I like to tell the story that during those 34 years, I lived through the good or the bad old days and into the good old days of simulation. Because I can remember back in early flying days when there was nothing more than a balsa wood box with a folding chair and pasted on instrument panels and consoles, and that was the part task trainer. Today, simulation for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter is so good that pilot will walk out to a single seat airplane worth about $150 million and fly it the first time by himself. So that's strong testimony to what industry has done in a relatively short period of time, and I have the good fortune to live in a great place and represent that industry. It started about 45 years ago and has grown to be the epicenter of the modeling, simulation, and training industry in the United States, and I would venture to say in the world. So Central Florida very much is a regional powerhouse in modeling, simulation, and training. And it's not just about the research park, it's not just about Orlando and Orange County, it is the region, it's the high-tech corridor. If I look at the number, there are 164 members of the National Center for Simulation. 150 companies or more are littered across the I-4 corridor, from Tampa, St. Petersburg through Orlando to Daytona and the Space Coast, representing this industry and doing good things for the primary customer, which is the Department of Defense, but I see emerging opportunities in many, many other sectors that I'll talk about a bit later. But just to give you a few gee whiz figures so that you understand how big this is a $5 billion a year industry, and that's just the checkbook of the Department of Defense. If you look at other applications in the civilian world for digital games, digital media, entertainment, education, homeland security, that number gets to be much bigger than just $5 billion a year. There are 53,000 people statewide that are involved in the industry, and the average salary is somewhere in the mid-70s. So it's a very much white-collar workforce, highly educated, and very capable of doing very good things that are good not only for our warfighters, but also for America. The National Center for Simulation is a very small organization, a pretty small budget, but we consider ourselves to be an extension of the economic development commissions from across our region. And my role is to be the cheerleader, to be the advocate, to be the guy out in front telling people just how important this is to a diversified Florida economy and trying to attract the next company or the next series of companies that really want to be seriously engaged in the modeling, simulation, and training industry to locate here. And there are many ways to do that. One is to plug in and let the National Center for Simulation be the conduit for entry into this market. Another way is to let the National Center for Simulation connect the dots and introduce companies that want to be here in some way to people that have been here for a while, understand the industry, and can be a spokesperson on the ground. And then the best of all worlds is open a business here. Hire 10 people. Leverage the high-tech workforce that is already here and been involved in this industry for years. Leverage some of that talent pool that is no longer employed over on the Space Coast. Hire them to be part of your new company here. So we are very much a successful cluster. We heard talk of clustering, and the modeling, simulation, and training industry has been a very successful cluster, a survivor in the down economy. The buying power of the Department of Defense has underwritten that, but we have not seen the budgets decline, and I'd be glad to address what I see for the future in the Q&A. But let me just leave it at that and say that why is it important to Seminole County? I'll give you an example. In the research park alone, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines have commands that buy simulation technology and applications for the warfighter and for America. Almost 1 in 4 of the 2,800 employees that go to work every day in the research park live in Seminole County. And I would venture to say that if I took a poll of companies that are members of the National Center for Simulation, some would be located in Seminole County. Others that aren't will have employees that live in your county and travel to work in those companies that might be located in a different county. So anyway, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Dr. Toft, in your presentation, you were mentioning that this is not a national issue of coming out of the recession, in this most severe recession in our lifetimes. You mentioned it, I believe, in a regional context. Could you cite the regions you think, or a region or two in the United States that you think will come out of this recession faster? And could you tell us, and I want you to phrase this in a different way, currently Seminole County has a strategic exercise going on as business community to come up with a strategic plan, economic development plan. And their last meeting is actually later this month. And they'll be presenting later in the summer their work product. And if you could kind of relate it to how you'd see going forward in the future, next couple of years, or what key target elements this region might have. Okay. Is that too long of a question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Frankly, you cannot point to one region that's doing exceptionally well, or you can't pick, you can pick a few states. There's clearly, as I said, it's easier, the data is diffuse and complex, but certainly there are states that are leading us out of this recession that you wouldn't have thought about. Or maybe we do in Florida. Texas clearly is a big state that's done exceptionally well the last 10 years. And there's a few other smaller states that survived the recession very well. Basically, the Mid-America belt, the Dakotas, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, that belt has done very well, and it's partly because of their economy. They are both agriculture-based and energy-based economies, but it's also because they're a little more limited government, and they focused a lot of their development strategies on their existing business. North Dakota particularly, over the years, recognized that they are never going to be a big business state, so they really paid a lot of attention to their business climate. So that at the state level is clearly evident that the states that brought us through the last couple of recessions are very different than, it was California and Massachusetts after 80 and 82, and it was Colorado after the early 90s recession and so forth. So that's happening. At the regional level, it's not so much location, it's characteristics of these regions. Firstly, the regions that I see positioning themselves well, I can think of some in Virginia and one or two in the Midwest. They are regions, number one, that are doing what you are doing. They have a sense of unity that you don't see in many of the others. They before the fact, have been able to work together, talk things through, and so that helps a heck of a lot, because the time factor is really important in this stuff. The fact that you've got your strategic assessment plan, right, coming out, is really very, very timely. And the fact that it's brought the business community together to try to develop a plan is very unusual, frankly, because most of these are done, as you know, public sector driven, or they're a partnership. Not that that's not valuable as well, but yours is very unique in that regard, which I think, I can't give you another example of a region or a county strategic plan that's totally private sector driven, you know, that generally it is a public-private partnership kind of approach. But what is unique about those that are working is this fact that they are recognizing the commonalities of their future, and also that they are linking, I think, education, those three things that I have on my list, the innovation, the entrepreneurship, and talent in creative ways together. You've got a place like Indianapolis in Indiana that really has done a remarkable job, for example, in a very distressed kind of changing manufacturing economy, do very well over 20, 30 years because of its public-private partnership approach. So it's these kind of characteristics that I think are more common in any particular. If you're looking for a competitor, frankly, it's up for grabs. I mean, San Diego, I think you use as a bit of an example because of its success in the biotech and life sciences area, and clearly they have done a great job, again, because they're thoughtful in their planning. They do work their numbers well, and again, I think that's important, is to do more analytics in this stuff to be really understanding of what's going on. Does that help?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you, and thank you for also recognizing the uniqueness of that task force, which is funded by the county commission with no strings attached. It's just remarkable.
Yeah,
the vision that they had. Mr. Berridge, if you could you kind of drill down a little bit to our business members here and discuss in terms of funding and how you see the funding and how that ties together in terms of the grant programs that are available in Florida, and how they might tie together with our audience.
Well, Randy, if I could, the premise is focus on the innovation and focus on the entrepreneurship and focus on the talent, as you saw on the slide. And you can do that at a macro level. You can do it at macro level. You can do it at a micro level. At the macro level, the county has long demonstrated its leadership. In my world, having sat at the table years ago and shared with the chairman of AAA Worldwide, why AT&T, after it shut down its legal operations of about 1,500 employees, why we elected in under 3 years to move 6,000 employees, new employees, with 25 divisions in the metro area, predominantly initially in Orange County, but then to show the leadership of Seminole County and the transition you heard in the remarks earlier about moving from a bedroom community, as many of us in the room know, to really a powerhouse in Seminole County's own right. You did that because you did attract AAA, and then the other end of that anchor, you got George Kosmak, you got Sid Miller, you got Owen Wentworth, you got 1,500 AT&T IT jobs, average payroll about 65,000, for I think about 1.3 million, as I recall, Randy, because you were with the county commission at the time, and where is Mayor Mealer? You were the mayor. You were mayor of Lake Mary at the time. So it was a combination of the city and the county coming together with a program to attract a major company, and that served as the anchor for some 30,000 jobs in the region. And you got some good volunteers, I think, in the process. So this program is really an outgrowth of that concept of partnering with companies. That was at the macro level. This is at a micro level in terms of, though we've partnered with large companies on this matching grants research program, in the main we've partnered with small companies. In 14 years, we've invested $55 million in 1,200 research projects by funding through our state funds, our recurring state funds. The good folks in MJ Swallow Shop, Dr. Tom O'Neill and the rest of MJ's team, to help us partner with companies. The company doesn't get the money, as MJ is going to quickly tell you if I didn't tell you that. The company gets the opportunity to have the corridor's money put on the university table, and it must be matched by the company. And though we now have attained an average of 3-to-1 match, if you're a small company and it's the first time partnering with you, we'll probably do it on a 1-to-1 basis because we want to see you succeed, because that's in history in the U.S. and in this region. Mr. Toft, as I think somewhere in there was pointed out, this is where the most jobs are created the quickest in our region, in our country. So if I could point out to the folks in Seminole County, 2 projects with Fiserv. We put up $400,000, and they matched it with $400,000 in cash and $400,000 in kind in terms of equipment, et cetera. With Rini Technologies, and this is the beauty of this system. We've seen demonstrated this last week a number of instances. This is a democracy, and it takes us a long time sometimes to achieve things, but we do achieve the things we set out for. Dan Rini his company was incubated in Orange County. But because of the potential presented to him and his company, he chose to locate his manufacturing space, some 13,000 square feet, and his 30 employees, average payroll 70,000, in Seminole County. We have funded 9 projects with him, but in so doing, our $400,000 was matched by $1.2 million. Now you're going to say, well, you just said it was a small company. How come it's like a 3-to-1 match? Well, you see, he figured out a way to drive additional grants from the federal government, and the state of Florida has now used that as a model, and there are other funds in the state of Florida to achieve what Dan Rini, with the help of MJ and Tom O'Neill, figured out. We funded Dot Decimal on 2 projects at $79,000, which was matched by $160,000. And SD Photonics, 4 projects at $118,000, a match of $169,000. So you see about $1 million of state funding from the corridor in just Seminole County, and you see the match. So that's money that is invested in this county, but I would submit really in the region. Again, those companies could go everywhere, so it's important for us to do what we can to keep them here. And oh, by the way, the talent piece. Well, as MJ knows, a project is not approved. Watch his head shake. It's wonderful to do something to see a doctor in physics shake his head. Mm-hmm. It is not approved unless there are students engaged in that project. And we have funded now 1,200 projects, as I shared with you, but 2,400 starving graduate and doctoral students. And I look across the room, we've all been one of those at one point. Those students are part of the process. And about 3 years ago, a co-ed came up to me and said, "This is a retention program." And I said, "Go to the head of the class. You figured it out, because you or your family or whatever resources fund about 25% of your education. The state and other sources fund the other 75%. So everything we can do to keep you here and grow you here and give you a meaningful research experience, that's what we ought to be doing." So that's kind of the essence of the Matching Grants research program, recognized last year by the International Economic Development Council as the best example in the world for what we do, and also last year by the State Science and Technology Institute as the best example in the U.S. for what we do. So MJ, let me publicly thank you and Tom O'Neill and the team and your counterparts at USF and UF for what you do. Thank you.
MJ, you mentioned when you were making your presentation, you briefly went over the Project Transform, which was the Semitech project that basically New York snaked us on and got. But are you still seeing an emphasis, or, there's so much conversation about green industry and all of this and everything from solar to everything else. Could you discuss where you see the future and how, again, our business community might be interrelating with the university efforts? Is that too long of a question?
No, not near as long as my answer is going to be. But
Well, I was afraid of that.
I guess the short answer is yes. Which part of the question you can figure out. We all look at economic indicators and seeing if we're coming out of a recession or not coming out of a recession. I've long said for a long time, only one thing you need to look at to see if we're coming out of a recession or not, and that's gas prices. Now, about 50 cents of the gas prices that we see now is due to the uncertainty in the Middle East, but the rest of the increase is due to coming out of a recession. Before the recession started, we were at $4 a gallon on a steep slope of increasing. Once it ends, we're going to get back on that slope, and it's going to get, energy prices are going to continue to go up. So that's the trend. You can argue about drill here, drill there, which I'm for, as we say in Orange County, do them all, do them right, do them now. For our venues, whether it's oil, nuclear, or renewables, but for sure the market for renewables is growing worldwide. It's the fastest growing venture capital investment in the world these days. If the U.S. goes to 10% of its energy from solar, that will drive 2 million jobs created in the country. Florida, 1% of our energy consumption would produce, if we manufactured the solar here in Florida, would produce 40,000 jobs. The money is in the manufacturing of the photovoltaics. The fuel is free. We have an advantage in Florida. The sun shines here, you may have noticed. We are the 4th largest electricity market in the country. We're about rock bottom in what I would call indigenous industry, in energy. We buy all of our energy from someplace else. So we have a tremendous opportunity here in Florida. As I said, we didn't get quite what we wanted out of the competition, but what we did get was we are part of the winning team. Semitech will have an office here in Central Florida, and we haven't given up on the pilot plant manufacturing concept, which is the concept that we proposed. The Department of Energy chose to fund 2 existing very well-developed facilities. So, you know, we have some road to cover, but we intend to do it, and I kind of picture our approach to this as a little cartoon I saw once that's Florida-related, and that's a giant blue heron trying to swallow a frog, and the frog has his front legs securely around the heron's neck and saying, "Don't give up." So we haven't given up on this project. We had a little bit of a setback. We hoped to hit a home run. We got a base hit instead. And so I think that there's a tremendous future in the production of solar energy products in this country. It's a place where we're losing ground to China, but we must as a nation turn that around, and I think we have an opportunity here in Florida, and I hope we do it while the industry is still young, so we don't relax back into the old model of trying to convince companies established elsewhere to move here, but we grow those companies here. So I think there's still a tremendous opportunity for us.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very optimistic. And Tom, could you talk a little bit about, you know, since you probably have one of the strongest and leading clusters in terms of national recognition, international recognition with modeling, simulation, and training, could you discuss how that happened, how the cluster occurred?
It all started 45 years ago in 1965 when the Army and the Navy moved a very small little detachment of simulation experts into what is now Baldwin Park. That used to be a training facility, naval training facility. And not long after establishing themselves there, the research park idea started to emerge. The state of Florida, city of Orlando, county of Orange, and in a big way the state have invested a great deal of capital to build a location that will foster what I also like to refer to as a three-legged stool, where academia, industry, and government come together to do modeling, simulation, and training. So the move from what used to be a training facility into the research park attracted the other services to consider this emerging cluster that was starting to grow in prominence, grow in numbers of companies that were in support of it. And now what we have is, in the research park, all of the military services except for the Air Force are represented with their acquisition command that buys modeling, simulation, and training technology. They have $5 billion in checkbooks if you add the total number of contracts that they let annually. So it is because of the fact that we have those military commands located in Central Florida that we have grown into be such a big cluster with the most number of industry companies winning the largest number of contracts when compared to other areas around the United States. So of that $5 billion, Central Florida companies probably win 60 to 70% of those contracts. So 60 to 70% of that money stays here with homegrown companies or companies that have chose to locate themselves next to the military commands that buy that technology. So it has been, over time, 45 years of growth. It has been leveraged and supported by great investment from the state of Florida, recognizing that this is important to a diversified Florida economy. They've made that investment in the research park. You look at the Partnership 1, Partnership 2, and Partnership 3 buildings that are located in the research park. They are dual occupied buildings that have 50% university and 50% government living in those buildings. Those were all paid for by the state of Florida. So Florida recognizes how important this is and is doing all it can to demonstrate to the government, the federal government, and the Department of Defense that this is important to Florida, and we're going to underwrite it by expending some of the capital of Florida to make sure that we grow, sustain, and enhance this high-tech industry.
It seems like both political parties and everybody's talking about trying to cut the cost of government expenditures going on, and particularly the military seems to be right on target. Dare you now predict what you think might happen in the short term in terms of this being a major funder for the whole industry?
Well, as I said, up to this point, it's been a survivor in a down economy. The buying power of the Department of Defense, which is just one part of it, because there are several sectors that I can address as well that are not military, where modeling and simulation technology transfer is becoming, you know, what I like to call a bright light on the horizon. But defense is not going to be exempt from the budget cuts that you can see being argued on the Hill as we speak. So we will see either flat defense budgets, probably declining defense budget, which reduces the buying power of the military in order to buy such things as modeling, simulation, and training technology. The one good thing that I will say about this is that as you look at declining or flat budgets, the operation and maintenance budgets of each of the services will decline, which means that they can't fly airplanes, they can't steam ships, they can't drive tanks, they can't do live training in a big way like they did before. They'll have less money to do that. So how do you make up the difference in readiness? We're not going to sacrifice the readiness of our forces just because we don't have as much money as we had the previous year. Well, simulation is part of the answer. Simulation is becoming so real and so capable. And when you look at it, 1 hour of flight time in a fighter simulator is about 1/10 the cost of the fuel that goes out the back when you fly the real airplane. So you can do it for about 1/10 the cost. So it's more efficient, it's cheaper, and it's becoming so realistic that I think we would be ill-served if our military leadership were to say, let's cut our training and simulation accounts an equal amount of the budget decline. So I think that bodes well for us. We will see the accounts for simulation and training stay relatively the same. But I do have to caution you here, there are no major programs on the horizon, new programs. We've already decided we're buying the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter to replace the F-16. We've already decided to buy a new tanker and awarded that contract. The F-22 program is starting to decline. They canceled the Advanced Infantry Fighting Vehicle contract. So what does that mean? That means that most of the money will be spent to sustain current systems and capability. There will be new applications of training technology and the way we train our soldiers, but there are no major programs on the horizon. So what the companies will be competing for is those support and sustainment contracts. Every simulator, when the airplane is upgraded in a block upgrade to change avionics or weaponry, the simulator has to have a like upgrade. So that they're not static, they're not fielded and then left alone. They have to be maintained and they have to be upgraded to stay current with the fleet so that you're not having negative training while flying a simulator that's different from the airplane. And I use airplanes because that's what I'm comfortable with. I'm sorry about that. But you can say the same thing about trucks and tanks and ships and other kinds of major weapon systems. So the focus of what the DoD lets contracts for will shift, but I think this industry will be a survivor even in flat or decreasing budgets because we just can't afford to cut training and simulation because that's going to be a gap filler to keep the readiness of our force.
Clearly, you know, this is an area that's grown around the automobile. It's kind of almost like another Los Angeles phenomenon, and there gets to a point where it's just not going to work anymore. And we entered this, unfortunately, late in the scene of development. It's very difficult to change the urban form, as it were, around rail. Once you've crafted your urban form around the automobile, and a number of cities are trying this. You're obviously one, but it is very difficult. So you have to be very strategic, it seems to me, about how you nurture growth along that corridor. If you're going to have a sun corridor, then you've got, it's like any corridor strategy. It's like the high-tech corridor strategy is about technology, whatever, but think of it not just as infrastructure. You've got to think of it as how you're going to foster growth, especially around stop points and so forth. Plan for that, and in fact find ways to elevate. We have a few city planners here that elevate the value of the property there and capture that value added somehow to help pay for it, because one of the biggest problems is finding ways. I've seen so many cities try to do this, and unfortunately they find themselves, they have great ideas, and then they find that they just can't develop a funding base, a sustaining funding mechanism apart from federal grants to help get it going. So there's a lot of thought you have to give to that, but it seems to me you've got great mobility here right now, but it's starting to get at its limit. I found that out last night coming into Orlando at 5 p.m. and all of a sudden found that my last 10 minutes of drive ended up about 40 minutes. I can say that the cities that have today have great commuter rail systems are advantaged, even the older cities. I happen to be a native of Sydney, Australia, and it's just fabulous still to go there and to find your way around that city anyway, any time of day, and special passes and all the rest is terrific. And Chicago's a little bit that same way too. But you're not going to be there. You're not going to get to that kind of network. It's just very difficult to imagine a network like that exists in those older cities. So you got to be really strategic. And I still think we're going to live with the automobile for a long time, and especially if we find electric vehicle solutions, it's going to solve pollution problems a lot. So we still got to live with both kinds of modes creatively. But certainly so far as the disadvantaged and those who are poor in our community, it's really critical. And again, that is important for the vitality of an area, to provide social equity and access to jobs. Really important.
Dr. Toft, to the questioner, of the 30 largest U.S. metro markets, Orlando is the only one without commuter or any form of high-speed or mass transit.
Is that right?
The only one.
Okay, how we're doing with venture capital? Not very well. At every event like this, I call them seances, where we get together to chant about what we do to develop our innovation economy. The same topics come up, and one of them is venture capital, particularly early stage. But progress is being made. We have a couple of homegrown venture companies that have formed. We have a group from North Carolina, Research Triangle, that's looking to establish something in our region. So there are some indications that we can grow some venture capital here. There's lots of investment in venture capital that comes out of Central Florida. However, it's invested in venture funds that are in Boston, New York, California, and not so much here. So we have work to do, a little bit of progress, but still a lot of work to do.
Wayman Armstrong, who is the current holder of the #1 small businessman in the U.S. as determined by the Small Business Administration right here in our metro area, is the incoming chair of Orlando Inc., one of the 4 organizations part of the Central Florida Partnership. His emphasis, he's already shared with the board for the for the coming term that he'll serve as chair is to improve on what MJ just described. We are woefully lacking in capital, no matter what descriptor you put associated with capital in our community. And so we've approached Mark Brewer with the Community Fund, and we've approached Margot Knight, and both of them said, you know, it might cost us $1 or $2 up front, but we're going to gain in the long run. The idea that what you're trying to do is to find capital, whatever you want to call it, to help these companies grow and stay here is what we ought to be about, and we know that the community organizations will benefit from the success of your endeavors. So credit Wayman Armstrong of putting something together, and his team, Roy Reed and Tom O'Neill and a bunch of other folks, Dan Reaney, Richard, are you on that as well? Are working on that. So those initiatives need to happen, and they need to happen with leaders in this room. Part of today, I hope, is that we can pose an ask of the audience. Look forward to doing that. This is one of them. There is not an organization in place that we've seen that is in Florida that is very good at doing this. And let's help define what this is. And let's emulate the success of Jumpstart out of Cleveland, an organization that raised $30 million from its community and matched it with $30 million from the feds and from the cities and the county and the state in Cuyahoga County and Cleveland and Ohio. Let's figure out how to do that. But I look around the room, and I know there's two successful gentlemen in here, one named Lynn and Danny, good afternoon, or good morning, Danny. I see Mark Hohenstein from Progress Energy. You know, a number of leaders in here. Why don't we figure out how to help this effort? If you look at Richard, we've done 2 projects with you. Our funds, I think, were kind of like a form of capital to help your dot decimal succeed and help you create jobs. We fund about 50 projects a year. Think about it. You've got state funds in a company partnering with your hometown university. Why wouldn't that be a good company to think about investing in? And oh, by the way, when you do, then they're going to grow, and we're going to need flooring, we're going to need office furniture, and all those kind of good things. Thank you.
I'm assuming the questioner was asking more about risk capital in general, not just VC, because VC is a very small portion of investment capital that goes into growth companies. And VC does play a very important role. I'm not denying that. But remember that we're talking about risk capital from basically basic business lending from banks up with increasing levels of risk. And the first area that you worry about is near bankable lending. Is there a way that you can improve near bankable lending to many of these small businesses? I see on your data there. And there are some programs. Some states have what's called a capital access program, and there's a few regions that are doing this. With a very small amount of investment from the public sector, you can create a loan loss reserve fund that actually helps, that enables banks like Centennial that are much more able to lend than some of the bigger banks to get into the near bankable lending. There's also angel capital networks that are really starting to take off in the United States. Nurture those, find out why there's some great programs. Some state, Georgia's been doing a great effort throughout their state, educating potential angel networks as to how to run their angel networks. You've got a lot of investors here in this county that might be interested in that. And the third area is maybe you need to nurture a few very intimate relationships with a few VC firms. Actually go out and invite them down here, do the red carpet treatment just like you do for a business looking at this area. I can think of a few that probably would be intrigued because, again, you've got the direct flights, very important for VCs. They like to come in and out in a day. They like to go back and see their kids play basketball at the end of the day, back on the West Coast or in Pennsylvania, or there's a few in Chicago. I mean, there's ways that you could probably package an arrangement where if you don't have enough VC activity here, that you could find one or two that start to take a real interest in the county.
Well, my worst nightmare, I'm kind of living it. We're about to enter our 4th year in substantial budget cuts to the base budget of the university. That's substantial. We will cross the Rubicon this year. We'll have more of our base budget coming from tuition revenue than we have from state support for the base budget, that budget which allows us to recruit top faculty. And also the state has not, basically the fund for funding new construction at universities has run dry. So we've had to borrow money on future income of our faculty from their research projects to build facilities. So that's the worst problem we have to deal with. We've got lots of ideas, lots of enthusiasm, but we're starving our higher education system something fierce. And we started at the bottom, and we're trying to find a new bottom. So that's my worst nightmare, that we're heading for the new bottom.
Do not be lulled into a false sense of relief or whatever when you have the honor to run an organization that is recurringly funded. You still have to perform, you still have to engage about 450 some volunteers each year to do these good things. But the one thing that I'm concerned about now, and if you all in the audience could help, as well as the panel, GrowFL, created in special session 2 Januaries ago, for $1.5 million, has created more than 1,600 jobs. And Richard, I picked on you a couple of times. You're shaking your head yes. Does that mean that's a valuable program that you've been through? And Seminole County, of the 67 counties in the state, has done a special thing, thanks to Bill McDermott. You've honored the folks that have been through the GrowFL program in your county commission meetings for the photo op and everything else, but that is special because we have used that to promote the fact that this is a government-supported program that has worked. Think about that. In 1 year, 1.5 million, you created about 1,600 jobs, direct and indirect. And you've got a CEO of a company here, a graduate of the program, saying it's a viable program. It has passed the House and the Senate, thanks to Dean Cannon and a whole bunch of folks on the House side as well as the Senate, at $2 million recurring funding. So help us if you have a way to touch Governor Scott so that item is not line item vetoed.
Well, let me reemphasize what makes Central Florida different than any other modeling, simulation, and training cluster in the United States. It's the fact that the military, the Department of Defense, has placed their acquisition commands in the research park adjacent to a world-class research university. They're all there, except for the Air Force. The Air Force is in Dayton, Ohio. But the Air Force has enough wisdom to recognize that they need to be plugged into the synergy that is made possible by proximity. All different services working together, sharing talent, sharing best practices in the same location called the research park. My worst nightmare is that through a base realignment and closure, one of the services decides to pull their outfit out. Then that three-legged stool I described to you that involved 3 legs of academia, industry, and government starts to break down. It starts to get a little wobbly. And the precedent of even one leaving would disrupt what I think has made us the epicenter for modeling, simulation, and training. So it's the services taking a command and moving it somewhere else.
This is a question about the degree to which basically clean energy jobs are a net job grower in the economy as a whole versus our traditional energy industries. And frankly, the research is inconclusive because, as you know, the existing energy industry is a huge industry nationally, and clearly the oil and gas industry is a very productive and very a large employer, and also, of course, electric generation industry is. So it's not clear at all. What is clear is that as we all admitted, that we have a situation in Florida that's kind of unique. You've got a dependency on, not just a national dependency, but you've got a state dependency on out-of-state sources. And so there's a real potential for growth of jobs in this particular situation. And so it's going to vary from place to place. And what is apparent also that the clean energy jobs embed the industry more locally in its own area. And that, in a sense, creates more of a dynamism, more of a sense of, again, unity or oneness than the way the energy industry has become in the United States, was become kind of displaced from the local needs. So there's a kind of, if you like, a community spiritual notion about this that's really intriguing, but the actual data is not, as I say, aggregate is not conclusive.
General, you also mentioned about your expansion out of the non-defense areas. Could you tell us a little bit where you see MS&T going outside of defense?
You don't want to be dependent on one customer. You know, you need a diversified customer base to make sure that the strength of the industry remains. And the good news is I see, you are all well aware how powerful the gaming industry is today. You know, kids playing video games. That industry segment spun out of what was originally support to the warfighter. But it has become so strong it now feeds back and gives us the opportunity to use virtual worlds and avatar technology to improve the way we train even our soldiers. But there are other areas out there that I think are really exciting. And I think there's a window of opportunity for Central Florida to seize the initiative, and I'm talking about healthcare. The use of simulation in training the future healthcare providers. And why do we have a window of opportunity? Well, let me tell you about 3 initiatives going on across the high-tech corridor. The first you're well aware of, the Medical City at Lake Nona, and the VA's decision to build a 60,000 square foot medical modeling, simulation, and training center of excellence as part of that brand new medical center. Tie that closely with the University of Central Florida, which has integrated simulation from the ground floor. The first brick of that new medical school has included simulation in a big way. So right there's a great deal of synergy. You add to that Sanford Burnham and Nemours Children's Hospital, MD Anderson's Cancer Research Institute, and the University of Florida's Research Institute that will go in there as well. And you have it's starting to change the dynamic of what Central Florida is because of that world-class medical cluster. Go just to the west of Orlando into Celebration Health, the Nicholson Center for Surgical Advancement, training robotic surgeons on the Da Vinci robotic surgery machine. They are expanding that facility to a point where they will go from training 4,500 robotic surgeons annually to more than 20,000. They will become world-renowned as a training location for robotic surgery. If you go farther west to Tampa and St. Petersburg, in close partnership with the University of South Florida and Tampa General Hospital, they are building a freestanding facility about 60,000 square feet in downtown Tampa that will be a medical modeling simulation center of excellence. So if you look across the high-tech corridor of those 3 examples of what is going on, and you think for a second that what we've been doing to train people who drive tanks and fly airplanes and steam ships is ripe to be transferred to the way we train the future healthcare providers. It astounds me that we still train surgeons by using a paradigm of see one, do one, teach one. That's the paradigm. Well, I don't want to be the guy in the middle where that guy's doing it for the first time. So why isn't it that our surgeons, why don't they practice in a risk-free environment using simulation, the procedure that they're going to do on you tomorrow? Why don't they make the mistakes in a risk-free environment before they actually take a knife and come to you? That is the future. And virtual worlds and avatar technology and the ability to model the human physiology will at some point give us the opportunity to do just that and take it away from just surgeons and think about nurses. I've had the pleasure of traveling to Israel recently and went to the Sheba Medical Center, which is the hospital of Israel. And they have a very robust simulation center of excellence. It's actually run by an Israeli fighter pilot. He's also a pediatrician, so he's not only a fighter pilot, but he's a doctor. But he runs this thing, and he runs it just the way he's been trained to fly airplanes. And they use this, not only, it's a combined medical center and medical school, they use the simulation center as a certification tool for admitting students into medical school. And they also use it as a certification tool before they hire people to work in the medical center. So they are years ahead of America in applying simulation to the future of the way we train our healthcare providers. But education. Our kids love to have, well, Randy Berridge does too, something in their hand doing this. Why aren't we
He's
using,
texting me over here,
why
by the
aren't
way.
we using that as the way we train and teach? We're going that way in the military, training anytime, anywhere, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, using the smallest of devices because they're so powerful. Virtual worlds, avatars, new ways of teaching that get away from gray-haired guys like me with PowerPoint slides and whiteboards that kids are not interested in. They want to be engaged. Immerse them in a training program where they learn without even knowing it because they're so engrossed in what they're doing. It's what they do all day long, and that's the future. There are big opportunities in education. Transportation, we talked about light rail. We can model the entire system and show you exactly how volume of passengers that it can haul, intermodal transportation requirements from buses and cabs and other things like that. Could have done the same thing for high speed if that was still on the agenda. But though transportation, homeland security, first responders training using constructive simulation, war games, if you will, but applied to a natural disaster to train the first responders to deal with a hurricane or whatever that might be. Digital media, there's such a close relationship between storytelling and digital media and the way we can use simulation in the future. Serious gaming industry I already talked about. Entertainment, Mickey Mouse is all simulation. Think about it, theme parks are simulation. There will come a day where every bit of your daily life will involve some form of simulation.
Randy, we got a couple minutes. Would you, do you have anything you wanted, and if you could just be thinking also, MJ, anything you want we might have missed or you would like to sum up?
If I may, this effort that we're going through is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's amazing the things that we're doing as communities, as regions, it's all the same. And Bill Olin will tell you, because he's done economic impact studies along with Bill Kircher in these areas, communities are doing the same thing. Let's just get together and figure out how to do it.
Dr. Toft, do you have any final comments for us?
Well, the thing that occurs to me as I've heard this discussion go on is the degree to which you're trying to embed or relate various activities to each other. And the more a county or a region can be interdependent, the more effective it is. Like this whole discussion about young people in college gaining internships. Once they get embedded in that local company, they're more likely, if not for the company to say, we want you to stay on, but for them to find that there are related companies that are dealing with that company and they'll stay on. And it's the same with the education system. We've generally developed an education system that's been aloof from the rest of the economy. And I've heard discussions, especially UCF has got a track record in this area, but I've heard discussions going on today about finding ways in which the industry's needs are related to the research that's going on. It's what I call acceleration, finding where that you excel in your universities and where your industries are going to excel and finding those linkages. And the more you try to do that, the more you'll become much more of a dynamic kind of economy because of those interdependencies and because you'll find then new opportunities come out of that. So if anything, that would be the kind of observation I'd make. And the final thing I'd always make a pitch for is you've got to really understand what's happening to you day in, day out. Do more dashboard work, collect more data about what's happening across the county on a regular basis, have reporting sessions between your county commissioners and your business leaders at least twice a year to say what's going on, what's been changing, who's coming, who's leaving, why are they doing it, and there's data that you can get now to help you do that. I can't emphasize that enough in the next 5 years.
I think that there's a few things that have sort of caught on, at least in the rhetoric that we hear at the state level and at the national level, and that is the The most important thing that we need to do as communities at whatever level is the creation of jobs and opportunities for citizens. And we also agree that that's the key to that's education. And we also agree that things like selected investment and building of clusters and entrepreneurship, these are all important aspects of a strategy. I think the good news is that we in Central Florida realized that a few years ago. We're a little bit resource challenged, I guess you would say, in how to do it. Our density is not quite what it needs to be for us to be successful, so we have a long way to go. But I think the good news is that we were into this before it kind of got cool, and if we can use the experience that we've accumulated already and the start that we have already to try to solve some of the problems that we have, resource problems, and they're resource problems. Whether it's early stage venture capital, whether it's investment in our education system or investment in our transportation system, these are all, we pride ourselves in Florida that we don't have any debt, but we have tremendous debt in infrastructure. And so, but we've got a good start. I think we've got the ideas here, we've got the energy here, we've got some experience to build on, and if we can go to work on the pieces that we're missing, I think we could be one of those leaders that comes out of this recession and defines whatever the next thing will be. But we're not going to do it by clicking our heels together 3 times and saying, we're the leader, we're the leader, we're the leader. We're going to do it by sucking it up and making some core investments. And if we don't do it, we will remain the third world within our own country, the place where people come and where we try to sell because the sun shines more and we're cheap. All right? If we're fine with that, then we don't have to spend 1 nickel of investment. If we're not fine with that, we have to suck it up and put some investment in our community.
This program is made possible by funding from the UCF Metropolitan Center for Regional Studies, where government leaders, business executives, and academic experts come together to discuss major issues facing the state of Florida.